Biography of Martin Luther King Jr. Chapter 1. Early Life. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a pastor, and his mother, Alberta Williams King, was a schoolteacher. King grew up in a middle-class African-American family in the South, where racial segregation and discrimination were widespread. His early life was shaped by the racism and inequality around him. King was a smart student and excelled in school. He graduated from high school at the age of 15 and went on to attend Morehouse College in Atlanta. Later, he studied theology at Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. King was deeply influenced by his studies, especially the ideas of nonviolence and justice, which would shape his future activism. Ted Luther King Jr. His early experiences with racism motivated him to fight for equality and justice for African Americans. His childhood and education set the foundation for his future leadership in the civil rights movement. Chapter 2. The Call to Activism. In the mid-1950s, King became involved in the civil rights movement. In 1955, Rosa Parks, an African-American woman, was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white person on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. This sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, a major event in the fight against segregation. King was chosen as the leader of the boycott. Even though he was new to activism, during the boycott, King called for non-violent resistance, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. King believed that peaceful protests were the best way to achieve social and political change. Despite facing threats and opposition, King led the boycott successfully, which lasted over a year and resulted in the desegregation of Montgomery's buses. The success of the Montgomery bus boycott made King a national figure and a symbol of the civil rights movement. He became known for his powerful speeches, commitment to nonviolence, and leadership in the fight against racial injustice. Chapter 3. Expanding the Movement. After the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King Jr. continued to lead the civil rights movement. In 1957, he helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, a group that aimed to organize and promote nonviolent protests across the South. King worked to unite African Americans and other groups in the struggle for equal rights. King led many important protests during the 1960s. One of the most famous events was the Birmingham Campaign in 1963, which sought to end segregation in Alabama. King was arrested during this protest and wrote his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail, defending the need for direct action and non-violent protest against unjust laws. King's leadership continued to grow as he called for greater economic opportunities, better education, and an end to racial segregation. His efforts to fight injustice spread across the country, and he inspired people worldwide with his message of hope, unity, and equality. Chapter 4: The March on Washington. One of Martin Luther King Jr.'s most famous moments came on August 28, 1963, during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Over 250,000 people, both black and white, gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. To demand civil rights for African Americans. King gave his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he called for racial equality, justice, and an end to segregation. King's speech is remembered as one of the greatest speeches in American history. He spoke about his dream of a nation where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The March on Washington was a turning point in the civil rights movement and helped to raise awareness of the need for civil rights legislation. The March and King's speech put pressure on the U.S. government to take action. Later that year, President John F. Kennedy introduced the Civil Rights Act, and in 1964, the landmark Civil Rights Act was passed, outlawing segregation in public places and banning employment discrimination. Chapter 5: The Fight for Voting Rights. In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. focused on the issue of voting rights for African Americans. Many southern states had laws that prevented African Americans from voting, even though they had the legal right to do so. King led a series of marches in Selma, Alabama, to demand voting rights for African Americans. The Selma marches were met with violent opposition from law enforcement, but King and his supporters persevered. The brutality of the police was captured on television, which helped gain support for the cause. The marches ultimately led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a law that protected the right to vote for all citizens regardless of race. King's work for voting rights was a crucial part of his effort to secure full equality for African Americans. His leadership in the Selma marches demonstrated his unwavering commitment to fighting injustice through peaceful means, even in the face of violence. Chapter 6: Fighting Poverty and Economic Inequality. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, Martin Luther King Jr. began to focus on the issue of poverty. He believed that economic inequality was a key part of racial injustice, and that true equality could not be achieved without addressing poverty. In 1968, King launched the Poor People's Campaign, which aimed to bring attention to the struggles of poor Americans, both black and white. King's goal was to demand better housing, jobs and education for poor people, as well as an increase in the minimum wage. He called for a national march on Washington to demand economic justice. Although King was assassinated before the campaign could be fully realized, his work for economic justice continued to inspire others. King's focus on poverty was a reminder that civil rights were not just about ending segregation, but also about ensuring economic opportunity for all Americans. His message was that social justice could not be achieved without addressing the economic problems that many people faced. Chapter 7: Assassination and Legacy. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was tragically assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, at the age of 39. He was in Memphis to support a strike by sanitation workers, who were protesting poor working conditions and low wages. King's death was a great loss to the civil rights movement and to the world, but his legacy lived on. After his death, King became a martyr for the cause of racial equality and social justice. His work inspired future generations to continue the fight for civil rights. His philosophy of nonviolence and his belief in the power of peaceful protest influenced many other movements for justice, both in the US and around the world. In 1983, the US government declared Martin Luther King Jr. Day a national holiday, which is celebrated every year on the third Monday in January. King's impact on American society and the world is still felt today, and his message of equality, justice, and peace continues to inspire people worldwide. Chapter 8: Personal Life and Beliefs. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of deep faith. He was a Baptist minister, and his faith played an important role in his activism. King believed that nonviolence was a moral and religious principle, and he often drew inspiration from his Christian beliefs and the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. King married Coretta Scott, a fellow activist, in 1953, and the couple had 4 children. Coretta was also a strong advocate for civil rights and worked to continue her husband's legacy after his death. Their partnership was an important part of King's life, and Coretta's support helped him in his work. King's commitment to justice and equality was rooted in his belief in the dignity and worth of every human being. He believed that all people, regardless of race, should be treated with respect and have the same opportunities to succeed. His vision for America was one where people of all races could live together in harmony. Chapter 9: The Civil Rights Movement's Impact. The Civil Rights Movement, under the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr., brought about significant changes in the United States. The movement helped to end legal segregation, gain voting rights for African Americans, and inspire other social justice movements. King's leadership proved that peaceful protest and non-violent resistance could bring about lasting change. The civil rights movement also had an impact on other areas of society. It helped pave the way for other marginalized groups, including women, LGBTQ+ people, and immigrants, to fight for their rights. King's work showed that when people come together to demand justice, they can change the world. The movement also led to significant changes in U.S. law, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1960. These laws helped ensure that African Americans had the same legal rights as white Americans. The movement's impact continues to be felt today, as people still fight for equality and justice. Chapter 10: Martin Luther King Jr.'s Enduring Legacy. Martin Luther King Jr. His legacy endures as a symbol of hope, equality, and the power of nonviolence. His leadership in the civil rights movement brought about significant changes in American society, but his work is far from over. King's dream of a racially integrated, just, and peaceful society continues to inspire people around the world. King's influence is still seen today in movements for racial justice, such as Black Lives Matter. His speeches, especially the "I Have a Dream" speech, are quoted by people fighting for equality in all areas of life. His message of love, hope, and equality is universal and continues to inspire new generations. Martin Luther King Jr. His life and work remind us that the fight for justice and equality is ongoing. His courage, vision, and commitment to nonviolence are a testament to the power of one person to change the world. His legacy will continue to guide future generations in the struggle for a better, fairer society.